You have landed on The Substance, a podcast aiming at being biblical, thoughtful, and human. Join us each week as we engage the culture without the culture war. I'm here live with my two friends. I got Vincent Edwards.
Yes, sir.
And Philip Marinello.
What's going on, everybody? Vince, it's good to have you in the flesh here again.
Yes, I'm so glad to be back in town.
My name's Trevor Aiken, and we also have... It turns out that's what my mama named me. And joining us this week is David Marshall from the Kaiju Apostle podcast. Welcome, David.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, man. Glad we were able to make this happen. We've been talking about this for a while, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is like a Kansas City podcast, epic handshake.
Extravaganza. Well, we've been talking about this, Little Casey Mo podcast crossover, man.
Love it.
I'm loving it.
So the film we have today, as you can see, you clicked on it, is the original Godzilla.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So a movie that...
Not 1998.
Oh,
I was hoping we could go through this whole thing without mentioning that. Yep.
I ruined your movie aspirations yet again.
It's fine.
All day I was like, man, what if I actually did watch the 98 one, just prep myself for that?
That would be hilarious.
I wouldn't do it to myself, but
You're like, I refuse to watch that.
I am going to revisit it at some point.
It's all right.
So, Godzilla, 1954, the original one here. Spoiler warning, if you haven't seen this before, definitely recommend that you do. I'm sure that plenty of folks who are coming to this have not seen it. I'm certain it's streaming on HBO Max.
It is.
I feel like it was on Prime. I don't know if it still is, but listeners can find it in a number of places. Also for free on archive.org, I believe. I might throw the free link in the show notes as well. So we're going to be talking about what happens in the film in depth, but kind of before we get into anything, I'd love to hear Trev and Vince hit me with kind of what you maybe were thinking when I suggested we do this, and then kind of like what happened with your expectations versus reality when you actually watched it.
I feel like my take on this might be representative to a lot of folks coming to this, from our audience, because it's kind of like, why?
But why is the substance covering Godzilla?
We're the substance. It's usually deeper takes on
we have
cultural
standards,
things.
Okay.
Hey, we covered Interstellar. I mean, we'll go pretty low.
Hey, now come on. But it's
staying out of that.
when people think Godzilla, when I think Godzilla, I just think, okay, big monster movie. Literally, to know the title is to know all you need to know. Kind of like Pacific Rim. You just think, okay,
also a very good movie.
I saw the trailer. I know
big
what
monster wreck stuff.
Yeah, I get it, right? I already get it, and usually that's not typically what we get. So I trusted Philip enough to know, okay, well, if he's recommending it, there's something else there. There's something else going on. And so I don't think I went into it with a ton of expectations. And I will say it exceeded expectations. It was a fun experience, transported me back to the early days. Not the early days, but an earlier time in cinema, a pre-ILM experience in
practical
cinema
effects
and
very tactile.
Yeah, because there's a lot of effects going on to make that movie happen, to pull it off. Watching a Japanese film too is kind of fun. It's kind of fun to think about it in comparison to some other art that's produced in Japan in the anime realm and things like that. And so I enjoyed it. I don't think it would still be on my I have to take this home. I have to own this. I have to watch this again. But there's definitely meaningful things going on there. It was definitely a worthy watch, and I think it's definitely a really worthy subject.
I'm glad to hear that. Vince, what about you?
Yeah, initial expectations was I already don't have much of an affinity towards old school movies in general.
Are you one of those guys that doesn't watch movies before Star Wars?
Well, no, I'll enjoy maybe I like White Christmas.
Okay,
that super old school
classics,
movie.
Yeah.
But that's because I really love music, and so that drew me in.
There
but
you go.
I usually don't go for it, so I was like, you know what? It's for the podcast. Let's just get into it. And it took me a minute to get through it. It's only hour 30. It took me 3 hours to finish because I kept taking breaks, but.
That is not how you watch a movie, Vince.
I think I did get... I agree with Trevor. It exceeded my expectations because I thought it was just going to be a really... I've gotten spoiled by today's technology when it comes to monster movies, and so I'm gonna look at this and see everything that's wrong with it, and it's just gonna be like boring. But it actually wasn't. It was more engaging, and like I said, there's a storyline with it, and so there's actually a deeper thought to what's going on. So I thought it was pretty good. I also agree with Trevor. I wouldn't like put it on my list and say I need to watch this again. I need to analyze it and really, really get into it more than it was like I appreciate having watched
I've got this mental image right now of like Godzilla coming through Tokyo and just like atomic breath in, like, and melting stuff and setting stuff on fire. And then Vince is like, nah, pause. Just like, I need a break. I get some like popcorn or something.
I think you guys should watch the Peter Jackson King Kong movie. That's like 3 hours long.
It is.
Oof.
But it's prettier.
There you go. It'll be a 6 hour Vince
it's a
time.
gorgeous movie.
Or 2 days.
No, I have not watched that since it came out, I don't think. So, David, before you kind of talk a little bit about the history of your history with the film and with the franchise, I'm sure a lot of the listeners who may have clicked on this, who know you from the Kaiju Apostle, already know you a little bit already. But for some of the Substance listeners who may not be familiar with yourself or the Kaiju Apostle, why don't you kind of talk a little bit about your background here with the film?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, my name's David. Started the Kaiju Apostle podcast back in 2019 with my buddy Chris. He lives out in Wheaton, Illinois. And it really just came from a desire to look at these films through what I would argue kind of a allegorical approach. In the sense that I'm very into early church theology, patristic, stuff like that. And I really like the idea of looking at something and having a creative approach to it without going against the meaning, right? That's something that, we see even in the Gospels, the way the Gospels writers would take, some of these Old Testament passages and they'd be creative with it, but it was never like disrespectful. It never like denied that there's an original meaning. It's just how do you come up with something new? And because I grew up with these movies, it was my mom introduced me to them. She grew up watching them in the drive-in, stuff like that. The Americanized version of this film, which came out in 1956, that was probably the first movie I watched when I was like 2 or something like that.
Oh, wow.
So it's something that's been with me for, at this point, almost 3 decades. So it's one of those, it's a franchise that if you give it a chance, you can actually see a lot of depth. But again, a lot of people, when they think of Godzilla, they just, what you're talking about, Pacific Rim, just giant monsters like blowing up buildings or, laying into each other. You're seeing all these commercials.
Which is a lot of fun. And
it is.
There's plenty of other entries in the franchise later on that are big monster fights that also do have substantive themes as well. But they're definitely, I feel like this is definitely the strongest film as far as themes go.
Oh, absolutely. This is, honestly, I would say, as a film, this is the best one. Because, you have people like, Takashi Shimura, which you've ever watched any, if you watch any Kurosawa films, you've seen him in there.
Right, Trevor? Kurosawa films, all those that you've seen?
Yeah, my buddy Kurosawa. Yeah, 100%.
But there's a lot, and the guy who handled the special effects, Eiji Tsuburaya, he was absolutely revolutionary. He would eventually end up creating the series Ultraman. But
which is one of my son's favorite things right now, and
that's
it's
awesome.
A delight to watch with him.
That's awesome. So, but yeah, there's a lot to these movies that people they don't see when they just think of men in rubber suits, right? And again, yeah, there's a lot of good movies when you come in regard to like the action and the fun stuff, but there's a lot of these movies where if you look at the context, like there's one movie, All Monsters Attack. It's typically criticized most strongly by general Godzilla fans because he used stock footage. It's about a kid.
Love it. I was going to get to that at the end. I adore that movie.
It's a good movie. And when you look at the context of why it was made, there's a lot of societal things that the director Shiro Honda, who directed this movie, Godzilla 1954, he's talking about latchkey kids, right? Parents who would both have to work long hours into the night and leave the kid at home in order to pay the bills. You're dealing with the societal pressures put on kids and the way that they're kind of having this mob mentality of working together. And just there's all these different things that if you look at what's happening in 1950s, 1960s Japan, it's more than just monster films. Monster films are it's a vehicle to share a much deeper and more significant message than just explosions and all that.
That was one of the things I said to Philip, like when we were kind of doing our initial reflections on it, was that it seemed to me like you use Godzilla, like why do you write a story like this? And it's like you use Godzilla to represent an adversarial force, or not even almost adversarial gives it too much, like almost just a force that your characters then have to interact with, and their character development and the community's development in response to it is really the point,
exactly,
rather than what the force is itself. And so once you realize that coming to this, you can maybe really see why it belongs on the substantive cinema list.
100%. So let's backtrack a little bit there. David, since you're the expert, you want to give us a 60-second kind of plot summary of the film before we get into themes. How would you explain Godzilla in 1 to 2 minutes for someone that maybe hasn't seen it and doesn't want to and just wants to hear us talk about it?
Oh man, I was not prepared for that. Let me pull up IMDb really quick. No, so I would say a Japanese community is struggling to figure out why their ships keep disappearing, right? And they're wondering, why their men aren't coming home. And what they discover is that in a local island, there has been a village that has centered their community around Godzilla, which is a deity of sorts. And what they're realizing is that there were some prehistoric creatures that lived down there, but because of the H-bomb testing in the 1950s by the United States, which is not directly referenced in the film, these dinosaurs really have now transformed into a much larger and looming presence. So now what we're really seeing is a community trying to figure out what do we do in the face of this threat. You have one party, which is Dr. Yamane, played by Takashi Shimura, who we mentioned before, who sees this as the ability to bring healing to Japan after being bombed by the United States and people dying and struggling from radioactive poisoning. They're like, hey, we could study this monster and find a way to potentially heal our country. But then you have everyone else who's like, no, we need to defeat the monster. We need to stop the destruction before it's too late. And in the midst of this, you do have a typical Japanese film love triangle, which I think is handled pretty well, all things considered. You do have the daughter of Dr. Yamane. You have Ogata, he's a sailor. And then you have Dr. Serizawa, who has developed a oxygen destroyer. But what he's realizing is he's created a weapon of mass destruction. And not wanting to be like the United States, he is scared of unleashing this weapon to the world. So that's kind of the ethical dilemma. Everyone's trying to figure out the best way to handle this while a giant dinosaur is tearing Japan to shreds.
Quite a lot in there for a monster smashment movie, right?
Oh,
well,
100%.
Again, once you realize what these monster films are set to do, you realize like, oh, that's kind of standard fare. But this
100%.
Definitely set the tone moving forward to be, because look back at like Frankenstein. You look at Dracula. Those were monster films, and like they all still like. So much going on there. It's incredible. Yeah. But people just, it's a vampire.
Yeah, Frankenstein's my wife's favorite book. And when I was talking to her about Godzilla, because she kind of has that reaction too, she's like, no, I could totally see. She made the analogy to Frankenstein as well.
Yeah.
Nice work, Christina.
So, yeah, that's, when you have English lit degree.
So, Trev, you saw the film pretty recently. What would you say, what has stuck with you as far as the themes of the film? What would you say as far as like our substantive cinema purview? What do you think are kind of some of the stronger themes in the movie?
Well, and I felt like David's summary was so good of it because it's this ethical questions, right?
Godzilla kind of is all about ethics,
because
the original one.
Because you have these two different approaches. One of them is almost driven by love, and the other one is driven by fear.
Yep.
And even within the one driven by fear, which is kill the thing, there is a kind of circumspect fear and then just an unbridled fear.
Well, yeah, like in the fear camp, there are kind of two distinct points of view as well. Like they're pretty ineffective. Let's try to shoot it, blow it up with tanks, blow it up, like stop it with it's pretty clear that Godzilla can't be stopped by any of the the traditional means.
But yeah, it feels like the reason why you need Godzilla, who can't be stopped by any of the traditional means, is it forces the development of a greater weapon.
Yes.
And
which
so
in the fallout of World War II, like
yeah,
this is, and I believe it's true. I forgot exactly what year it was, but I think officially in the arts in Japan, because things are pretty regulated over there, there was kind of an embargo, like you cannot talk about or explicitly reference the atomic bomb in pop culture.
Wow.
I think Godzilla was the first like wide piece of pop culture to actually deal with atomic fallout.
Yeah.
In the post-war period. So at the time, I mean, it's a heavy movie now in 2021 to watch. Like in 1954 in Japan, like this is pressing all of the pain points.
And I mean, Japan's got a front row seat to this, but also the entire world at this point. And at that point in time, right, you're talking about really the Cold War has been kicked off and is in full gear. Russia is
atomic fear and paranoia is like kind of at an all-time high.
Because there was a little bit of time where Russia didn't have nuclear capabilities.
We were like 1 or 2 years ahead of them, right?
Yeah, and so once they developed that in the mid 50s, I mean, that's when you start having all of that thing that we look back on now and think about, the drills at schools and stuff like that. And so, yeah, it really does enter into that conversation to say, whoa, is an arms race, what does this mean for humanity? This really just even this whole approach. And I almost feel like Serizawa is there to kind of be the foil for what they thought America and maybe the scientific community should have been.
Exactly.
With the atomic bomb.
Well, to add a little context, because it's something that, if you're not super familiar with this time of history, most people wouldn't think about it. So obviously the bombing, everyone knows about the bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, right? But what's interesting, I say interesting in a very poignant way, there's actually a scene that was cut out because what sets the backdrop for this movie is something that happened probably about 6 months before the movie was even released. Is you have the hydrogen bomb testing on the Marshall Islands. It was March 1st, 1954, which the hydrogen bomb that was used, which they do reference that in the movie, but it was almost 1,000 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima.
That's right.
Yeah.
So what's crazy though is the fact that like the Americans, they took the proper precaution to get their people away because of the fallout, but they didn't say anything to Japan because
they're not like heads up, we're testing this in your backyard.
If they did, it was like the bare minimum. And what they weren't expecting was the fallout to actually spread out and affect a bunch of, again,
the fishing boats.
Like all the fish that were contaminated had to be thrown out. So, I mean, that's, it's not just World War II. It's like this is something that was very fresh in their minds.
Yeah.
And a lot of people probably wouldn't know this unless they dug deep. But the fishing boat in the movie, like they named that fishing boat after the fishing boat that had all the fallout cover
it. Was the Lucky Dragon.
Lucky Dragon number 5. Like that was like an ode to something that had just happened.
Did people get sick from that? Do you?
I mean, it was not good.
Died.
Yeah, not good.
Yeah.
So I mean, there was I don't know if the right terminology, but I mean, the United States got sued and all this stuff, and it's just one of those things where it's there's and
that's in like the first couple of minutes of the movie too.
Yeah,
right. It's interesting because the professor, help me out with the name,
Dr. Yamane.
Yeah, he is just literally. He might as well be talking to a wall. He's saying, like, let's study it, this kind of thing. And what's funny is the film just kind of shows all of society not even entertaining his option.
Yes.
It's just...
He's like the crazy person.
It's like, but we have to kill it. Like we have to kill it, though, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting because there's this really poignant moment where... one of the like you were talking about the love triangle, I think it's Ogata who's like, he asked him point blank, like, what do you think? Are you with all these people who want to kill him? And he's like, well, we got to keep Japan safe, and kind of that fear-driven response. He's like, get out of my house.
Yep.
because he understands, yeah, there might be a better way to do war and weaponry and all that kind of stuff in that thing, but like maybe the better path in general is to avoid it, is to find a different solution to the problems.
Well, it's like the how violence kind of begets violence, right? Because Godzilla
violence
existed ahead of time. You have all the scenes with the Islanders talking about their traditions of like sometimes if things got really bad, they would have to sacrifice one of the young girls of the tribe to Godzilla. But he was just a Jurassic creature. But then the H-bomb turned him into the irradiated monster that had the atomic breath and kind of made him invulnerable to all the attacks. So like they created Godzilla, and now it's like, oh shoot, our violence has created this thing that we need to get even more violent to stop. And I mean, the film really does paint a pretty bleak picture of just how violence can progress like that.
Yeah.
Because I mean, you can't have Godzilla tearing everything up and like, let's have peace, because you kind of can't have peace with Godzilla at that point.
And I think being like out of the Cold War age, some of this is lost on us. We hear about this, we read about this, but because there's kind of this general peace now, like we don't really take a lot of time to sit back and think as a people. Mankind literally has the capability now to destroy the planet Earth.
Yeah, all life.
We do. It's sitting in bunkers.
That's
just
insane.
Waiting for the wrong person to press a button somewhere. And like that's not to strike fear in the hearts, but that's to like
it's sobering.
To cause a sober theological questioning as well. Because we have a certain eschatology, obviously. In other words, a belief about what the Bible teaches is going to happen at the end of the world. But at the same time, there's no, like, I've studied eschatology, I've studied what the Bible says about the end times. I don't see any guarantee that says that somewhere along the line, mankind doesn't screw it up in some big way and pull the trigger.
God uses means.
The Black Death was devastating to Europe, right? And a lot of the Europe-Asia region. There was a lot of different events in history that have felt like the end of times to different folks. And now we look back on them in history and are like, yeah, that was rough. We have this now, like this power exists as a ethical dilemma and a stewardship problem big time. And it's important for humanity to think about that. And it's stuff like these things that kind of help us maybe turn our minds to that and what that means.
And I love how Ishiro Honda, in this one in particular, uses the artifice of popular entertainment to genuinely engage with these things, right? You kind of can't have these conversations would not be engaging or interesting to have in a lecture form, or certainly not as interesting or engaging.
I mean,
right?
I'd probably watch it, but yeah.
I mean, I might.
But less people would.
People would. Well, I mean, we talk all the time. Like we talked about with KSP about like how fiction and how art can engage us on just a different level.
Yeah. 100%. And like some of the conversations we were just having about like why is it that it seems like a lot of the news that's given out today and when topics are really being explained in depth, it's being done by comedians. And
RIP journalism, right?
Right. Yeah, it seems like but I think it's because people, like, if you want to engage at a popular level, obviously all those studies and things are out there, but to have somebody pull it together and give it at a popular level that's entertaining and will keep you engaged in the content so that you retain it, like that takes a special skill set.
Well, since we're on this topic now, on the Criterion edition of Godzilla, which is the one that Trevor and I watched, the physical edition comes with an essay by Jay Hoberman. And one of the things he talks about in relation to this, the violence and the bombs and the escalating nature of that, towards the end he says, Serizawa equates his oxygen destroyer, which is kind of the big final device that eventually in the film defeats Godzilla. Serizawa equates his oxygen destroyer with the H-bomb and is persuaded to use it against the H-bomb, as it were, Godzilla, only by a television spectacle of schoolgirls singing a peace hymn. As this music is reprised in Godzilla's last moments, it associates the monster with its human victims. Again, like Godzilla was both a victim and a victimizer, as it were. Like the movie doesn't flinch, really. Like there are a lot of women and children that get killed basically on screen. It's kind of rough, man.
Those were some of the hardest parts of the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like you think, oh, like it's the 50s, like they're doing miniatures, like it's gonna be silly, but like every time I watch it, and I think if you watch the Japanese version and not the dubbed version, having to read subtitles like makes you focus in more, and you're in it, and those scenes of destruction, man, like you feel that.
We'll be where Daddy is soon.
Right?
That line. Yeah. Yeah.
And that whole part, like, so he's in Tokyo and Tokyo is burning. I don't know, like, I know there's obviously a ton of atomic connection, but I started talking to Philip about this at the time, about the connection of the Tokyo firebombing. I don't know how much evidence there is that is in the mind of the director as well, but actually, like, more people died in the Tokyo firebombing, right, in that short period of time than even in the atomic bombs. And the craziness of the conflagration and how concentrated and how people were trapped and like they tried to flee to safety, but it turned out that the fire was so hot in the entire area that even concrete buildings just became ovens. And like the reality of like these people going where Daddy's going, like this isn't fiction for them. This is very real. Like just and it kind of connected to me because it seems like in Japanese anime and those kind of things, you always have these like Dragon Ball or like or Naruto or One Punch Man or all this stuff. You have these guys who are like these super powerful people with super powerful villains who come in and just like wreck whole sections of the town, like just skyscrapers falling down and all this kind of thing. And I just wondered if but they saw that happening to their cities.
That's part of the national consciousness in a way that we don't share.
Yeah.
Vince, what stuck out to you on an artistic side? What did you think about the music? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, actually, that was the part that really the peace hymn that you were referencing earlier. That
tear up,
it reminded me of the music that came near the end of Schindler's List. And I know they're not the same, but that music impact of like they're singing and you're looking at the words and you're also listening to kind of how they're doing that, and it's signifying something that is supposed to have an emotional response. And it just reminded me of that because that was one of the older movies, and they had I can't remember it in its entirety, but I remember that there are a lot of Jews that were saved from a lot of concentration camps. Yet the main character, had that music following him as he cried because he felt like he could save more. And so it was just like that was one of the parts that kind of caught me off guard. Because I wasn't expecting to feel a whole bunch more than just intellectually think about a lot of things. But then when I actually like heard that and was paying attention to it, it was like it was pulling at my heartstrings a little. I was like,
This Godzilla movie's making me feel.
Right. This is Godzilla still, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, that was one of my big takeaways. Was just the music of it was very, and I mean, other areas where the music was played and kind of that marching tone and things like that in other areas was really good. And it was, I will say that those movies in a lot of ways do better in the older films than in some of the modern stuff because it's super ambiguous and it's just kind of placed there. And it's like, we hope this fits to the
music in this film was composed specifically to kind of create that mood. And man, I think the opening is so strong. It's just black background with white text, like very, very sparse. Like, here's who created the movie, and the music is so like intense, and it sets the mood right away with like some of the screeches and animal sounds, and just some of the like the thumping.
There's a very driving beat with the
very much, and then it goes right into like the ship getting bombed. Like it's very effective.
So, David, what are some things that you would say, here's some things you can be expecting to understand that relates to just life or time now from that film?
Yeah, so obviously I want people to... I was talking to someone earlier today. I was like, man, I want to find someone who has never heard of Godzilla and has no idea what Godzilla is and sit them down and watch this movie.
That might be hard, but yeah.
I know, because it's so ingrained into pop culture, for better or for worse. But so without like really spoiling any plot points, I mean, I think what someone now who watch this movie something they can make a correlation, or being able to find something to apply, I guess maybe in their life, is kind of a way. So first of all, cheating's bad, right? Adultery is bad. So let's just get that out of the way. That love triangle, man, bothers me. No, so
okay.
no, just kidding. No, I think there's something you're talking about, redemptive violence, or this cycle of violence, right? So it's important to understand Ishiro Honda. He was a pacifist. He did serve in the Japanese military. It was not necessarily by choice, and I say that in the, I guess, simplest way possible. He was forced to be in the military. To the end of his life, he would have night terrors and still wouldn't even tell his wife about some of the stuff he witnessed. He was a part of managing a comfort woman as well, which is pretty much like a brothel. One of the things he tried to atone for in his life. But all that said, so he was a pacifist, and you see a lot of that in this movie, where with Dr. Serizawa, that wasn't his intention to make a weapon, right? He was doing his research, and he was being a scientist and going where the science leads. And he realized the ramifications of what he had done. But rather than taking the approach of how could this benefit our country, which is a very logical and normal thought process, right? Well, I've developed something. How can I benefit myself? It was a very sobering thing for him. And there's a lot of, you're talking about stewardship earlier, and that's something that I've really been thinking about lately in my own life. So I think that's big, is as Christians, we have the ability to develop and learn new things. I've thought about social media, right? And when people made Twitter and Facebook, they weren't being good stewards and thinking about the things that they were making, because now all of these sites have spiraled out of control. They've helped start genocides. They've, misinformation left and right.
Yep.
You can talk about, oh, well, it's done all this good stuff, but we're not counting the cost of what these sites, our mediated reality is, right?
Yeah.
So
we've talked about that on here for sure.
Yeah. So with Serizawa, he is counting that cost of, like, I have to burn all of the evidence, and I have to give my own life to make sure that this never sees the light of day. That is incredibly sobering in a world where we have smart devices that we can continually view trafficked and abused women. Right? There's hundreds of horrible things we can do with these devices, but we're not thinking through what these things can actually do because it benefits us. I can text my wife. I can check my email. I can do the podcast. So I think that stewardship, that the seriousness he took that, is important. The same way that Dr. Yamane, he's almost trying to plunder Egypt, right? Just being like, how can I take this very horrible situation and find something good out of it? Because again, he was thinking the benefit of the whole, not just for himself, but how can I try to bring healing not only to people, but obviously Godzilla didn't choose to get bombed, right? So he was thinking it from a very empathetic standpoint as well, and being like
Godzilla is a living
victim.
Creature. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So there's that element you're talking about, victim and victimizer. That's super important. One of the things I learned in my pastoral care and abuse class is the line between victim and abuser is very thin. It's very, you go back and forth. I mean, it's unfortunate, but it happens. And I think there is something there to be said, especially in our current climate, of understanding that, even abusers, even the worst people that we deem worst, right? These are still people that have been hurt, like Rush Limbaugh.
Well, a lot of time those folks have been hurt, right?
And that's
the old
exactly
adage,
it.
like hurt people kind of deal.
Yeah.
So you look at like Rush Limbaugh, right? You could argue he has had a horrible influence on the way, you're talking about journalism earlier, the way we handle news, the way we handle people we disagree with. But at the end of the day, this is someone who is still made in the image of God. This is someone that had family and friends who are now hurting. And possibly he hurt them. Like, so it's such an intricate web that we don't think about. So when we can get a giant monster to make us think about, like, oh, maybe this quote unquote abuser is actually a victim as well, and maybe I should try to find a way to not only help the people in its wake, but what could I do to potentially heal it as well?
Yeah, and I know you brought up Rush, but my mind immediately went to Ravi Zacharias. And I don't know if you've seen.
Yeah, I didn't want to open that can of worms, but yes,
but I just did, I guess. But I mean, and this isn't the podcast to get all into that because we'll have a topic toss up. I'm sure.
I think by this time the topic
eventually.
toss up on Ravi might be out. I don't know.
Maybe, yeah. We'll see when that comes out. So we don't necessarily have to dive into that here. But yeah, you're right. Like understanding, just there's complexities there. That's not to get him off the hook. It's not to get anybody off the hook. But
no, evil's evil, and that's why Christ had to die. Like that's the whole thing.
But yeah, you don't evil your way out of more evil.
Correct.
Right? Like someone has to step in
with good, with love. Right? I mean, that's a continual scriptural commandment to not return evil with evil. You know, Jesus, that is not an over spiritualization. Right? When he says turning the other cheek, you could go and try to figure out what did that mean in the first century. The point is, don't do it back. Don't love your enemies.
Yeah. Yeah. And the thing about it, and I think the reason why we spend so much time in the head game on it is it doesn't happen without personal cost.
Absolutely.
There is no way to treat evil with good and not get burned, not have to sacrifice, not have to give something up, not have to die to yourself in the process. That is the call of the Christian life. That's why it's the narrow road. That's why it's pick up your instrument of execution and follow me. That's the whole that's the game. That's what he told us to expect. It's what Paul taught people to expect, right? And so in a sense,
and not that Ishiro Honda was trying to picture Serizawa as a Christ, but the fact that he had to sacrifice everything, and like David was saying, he was just trying to do his job, kind of stumbled into what appeared to be a solution for the problem, but if left unchecked would create an unlimited host of problems, kind of with the whole nuclear panic and all that. Like if the oxygen destroyer, if the military industrial complex got the plans, got a hold of it, it could literally do unending damage.
And I mean, in a way too, this is a dumb take, but Serizawa is also kind of the picture of all the ways guys get themselves into trouble with women. Because the whole thing started when he tells the girlfriend.
But if he didn't, Godzilla would keep going.
Well, then, maybe they could try the other guy's way.
The other guy didn't have a way. He's like, let's study it.
Let's study
it. And it's hey, can you stop destroying Tokyo and let me study you?
Guys, just move Tokyo.
Here, if we get a really big rope, we can throw it around his neck and tie him up. Yeah, it's just not going to work.
Yeah, that's the folly of man and the violence kind of necessitated Serizawa's oxygen destroyer to be the solution, but it was also it's a tragedy. It's actually a tragedy that has to be the solution, and the only full way to kind of close the circle of violence is to destroy all the plans and then have himself be the one to go implement it, so that his knowledge kind of dies with him too.
Yeah,
all this from a monster movie, right?
Yeah, it is really good to kind of put it in that Aristotelian framework of okay, what kind of story? It is a tragedy.
100%.
There's no one wins. This whole thing happens, and
because Godzilla, an innocent creature, was acted upon, became an instrument of destruction. The scientist who was trying to help humanity is like, man, now I gotta kind of destroy. Now I kind of got to destroy creation in order to kind of help other aspects of it's a mess.
What's the role? And maybe David, you could comment on this. Like the fact that this is all happening to Japan, that always felt really interesting in the movie. That they don't have the agency in it. This testing, like you said, they never even mention it in the movie. They just kind of say this testing's happening, but it's not their testing. And this monster comes and then attacks them, which is not their fault. And then all these innocent people in these cities get wrecked, and they didn't do anything. Is that any different
than war, though? I mean, that's you're talking about the fire bombings. I looked it up. I mean, unless I looked at it wrong, I mean, there was almost 500,000 people that died because of the bombings compared to the fire bombings. So it was quite a bit more, along with the long-term effects. But the point being, innocent people died. I mean,
A lot, like on a crazy scale.
Yeah. So the thing that as a I don't want to say I'm a pacifist. I say I practice just peacemaking is the phraseology. But as someone who abhors war, it's largely because we've moved away from the intimacy of war. It used to be, if I'm going to kill someone, I got to stab them up close, right? Then you moved to bows and arrows, so you kind of added a little distance. And then you had rifles, and what was it? Don't shoot till you see the white of their eyes, right? So there's still an intimacy there. But now we just drop bombs on people. We do it from freaking computers now. Yeah. Right? So thanks, Obama. Yeah. So right? There's something here where the bombs, these atomic bombs are indiscriminate, right? They don't care who you are. I'm just going to kill you. And that's what we're seeing here with Godzilla. There's no logic or reason. Godzilla doesn't know who bombed. He's pissed. So he's just going to go and part of it too. And we see
probably move in the direction of the tanks and the folks
he's attracted to the lights. That's the thing is you'll notice he's attracted to the lights there. But in later films, there's one in 2001, and this is the one that helped set me on this track of viewing the film through kind of like an allegorical lens, is that movie takes Godzilla coming back to life in a way, and he embodies the spirits of all of the Asian people who had died in the war that Japan had, in a way, collectively forgotten about. So it's almost like all of these voices crying out from the ground, and it turns into this Godzilla figure, right?
That's GMK, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Shout out to the most recent and final episode of the Kaiju Apostle, right?
Correct. So all of that said, I mean, it's more than just it's not even necessarily a Japan is guilty here, but it's really, again, the way that with our at that point, even still current view of warfare, civilians were caught in the middle of it. There's no way to, I don't know if people didn't care, but that was the way that people just like, we got to win at whatever cost. And apparently the cost was men, women, and children. Didn't matter.
Yeah. And it's tough, right? Like in all of these cases, right, the industries of the nation, the companies and the things that make up the peacetime industrial operations end up becoming nationalized and used for the war machine. So it's like, these things are right next to homes, right next to schools, right next to, and that's not even counting the things where things were intentionally placed in those areas to shelter them, to make them harder targets, things like that. So
war is messy and ugly,
and it's not like the government's like, well, let's put all of our like potential bombing targets in one area away from all the civilians so that none of our people get hurt. There's a lot of strategic reasons why, disincentives for them to do that. Sure. And it does cause us to ask questions like, why don't we prioritize human life more? Like, sometimes there's a lot of things in life where it's like, it's just the way that we do things, and we think, well, that's the way it's done because that's the way it needs to be done. But those ruts kind of keep us from imagining what it would look like to have different priorities.
Yeah.
Yep. And that's kind of exemplified in the town hall type scenes where they are trying to, as a society, figure out what to do. There really is so much to these movies.
No, there absolutely are. And again, it's just that perception of when you think of Godzilla, what do you think of, right? And I mean, I'll be honest, as a kid, I've never thought about stuff like this, right?
Certainly not. No, my son loves Godzilla. I'm sure he is not thinking about ethics ever when he's making punching and fighting sounds and explosion sounds. It's fun to watch.
Yeah, right? I mean, when I was a small kid, between Jaws and Godzilla, I would cry when the monsters died, right? I'm just like, why do they have to die? I didn't understand that. But, in saying that, it's the same reason why, going through like Ultraman with my son, I'm very conscious and being like, okay, so you understand, like, we're watching this movie, but just because they're fighting doesn't mean that's something that we should be doing, right? So, or, we talk about like why this conflict is happening. So just because I didn't do that as a kid, like I'm trying to do that with my children now, because there are a lot of things happening here in the Godzilla films, at least I would argue in the 50s to 70s
the show
ones.
Era,
that really have something to say, not just to that culture, but to future generations as well. to be trite, you just have to have ears to hear, right? It's just it's not always right there in front of you, except for this movie. I mean, it just hits you.
Boy.
It bludgeons you with it. There's no way around it.
Yeah.
But again, as a kid, I watched the 56 version, which is the Americanized version, and I don't go as far as some people say as it whitewashed this movie. It absolutely didn't, but it definitely did not.
It kind of took away the power.
Yeah. In a way, it neutered what was trying to be done, for sure.
So if any of you guys are interested in watching this film, watch the original 1954 version with the subtitles. It's much more affecting.
I was going to ask too, so we talked about this and setting this up and the timing here. Like, there's a new Godzilla movie coming out.
Can't wait.
Godzilla versus
Kong.
As you guys think about that, just hopefully not spoiling anything from any trailers, or obviously like they're always in that like weird thing before a movie where it's like, I don't want to see too much about it because I really want to enjoy the experience.
I don't, but like some of it's already been spoiled and I'm amped for it.
But like, without doing any of that for anybody else who might be in that same boat, like when you hear about this matchup, when you hear about this production, how does some of these themes and knowing about some of this like get you amped for that, or are these just totally different?
I'll let David have the final word, but yeah, I would say I'm excited just to see some crazy monster action in Godzilla versus Kong. I'm sure there will be some because, without getting spoily, like the heart of all these conflicts is the folly of man and what we set ourselves up for, and the monsters are kind of an exaggerated depiction of the consequences of our actions that are typically selfish and a lot of times capitalistic, and like the things we do for our gain or to cut corners or to like not think of our neighbors just so that we can benefit ourselves. Like the monsters typically exemplify aspects of that. But really, Godzilla versus Kong is just going to be some real pretty kaiju action.
It's going to be bananas.
Can't wait. I can't freaking wait though. It looks so good. I'm so sad that.
Final word, the dad joke, or you got more on that?
No, I got more. No, I'm excited too. I mean, I was that guy that I saw King of the Monsters 3 times in theaters, and as I saw it each time, I liked it less and less, to the point that I don't even remember the last time I watched it. It's better than Rise of Skywalker, I'll give it that. But it's
shots fired.
So it's just one of those movies.
That's kind of not hard.
No. So it's one of those movies that, I say this leading up to, there's a reason, up to Godzilla vs. Kong. So King of the Monsters just felt like all spectacle to me, but it was trying to be substantial. And I didn't get anything from that personally. It just felt like, okay, how do you take every cliche out of a Godzilla movie for like the general populace, the way that they might view Godzilla, and let's cram it into a movie? And I get it. The guy who directed it, he was a huge fanboy. I'm also the opinion sometimes that I don't want a fanboy directing a movie.
I'm a little surprised. Like, I didn't think it had a terrible amount of substance. I mean, there was some of the eco-terrorist stuff that I thought had a teeny bit of substance, but like, I just loved it as a spectacle. Like, seeing Ghidorah look that, like, Ghidorah was incredible.
There's some fun parts, but to me, when I'm seeing Godzilla vs. Kong, I'm like, okay, this reminds me of the way I felt when I saw Pacific Rim for the first time, and I'm really excited about that. Like, I would be absolutely fine if Godzilla vs. Kong was completely, like, absent of substance, and if it was just a lot of fun, as long as it's, like, committed to that. That's kind of where I'm at, where I'm like, if you're going to do something, just commit to it.
Yeah, be your style.
I think, though, that Kong will have, I mean, some spoilers that I don't want to share based on stuff that is probably pretty common knowledge in the monster movie fan community. Like, I think that Godzilla vs. Kong will be a little bit more substantive than King of the Monsters.
Yeah, we'll see. But
either way, it's going to be dope.
Yeah, I know personally, like, Kong Skull Island is my favorite movie out of that series so far. So seeing more Kong, I'm absolutely for it. And if anyone has to win, I'm putting my money on Kong. So
Ooh. Money on Kong.
Are you even a Godzilla fan, David?
Wow.
Yeah. Wow.
Shots fired.
Sweet. So, David, here at The Substance, we like to have our guests that come on give us a substance shout out. If you have a book or a podcast or music or any type of substantive content that you've been consuming, just share with the audience what you've been engaging in recently.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll share 2 books that I'm reading right now. Is that cool?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do it, yeah.
Okay. So the one that I can see out of my periffs is Who's Afraid of Postmodernism by James K. Smith. So I have an absolute man crush on Jamie Smith here. He is my favorite Calvinist. Super.
I'm personally offended, David. Just kidding.
Yeah, well, yeah. you start writing some books like this and we'll talk, right? So Jamie Smith is definitely very Augustinian in his approach, but the point is with this book, he addresses a few different postmodern maxims like, there's nothing outside of the text. There's a couple other ones as well, and trying to be like, okay, as the church, and this is 2006, by the way, as a church, we can either be afraid of postmodernism or we can look at it and help it draw us back to a more ancient way of thinking. He's really big into going back to like again, Augustinian, patristic, early church-rooted framework of the way that we not only view the world, but the way that we practice and worship and our liturgies. Yeah. He wrote a book called You Are What You Love, which is, I honestly think...
Oh, I've heard of that one.
Yeah. He also did On the Road with St. Augustine, which I just recently heard about as well.
Yes, that book is incredible. That was the first book I read this year. It was very, very, very good.
Nice.
So definitely.
So that's Who's Afraid of Postmodernism, you said?
Yeah. So it's good. It's one of those things, again, just kind of, I think as Christians, whether it's postmodernism, critical race theory, we don't have to agree with these things, but it's super important to actually know what they are instead of dealing with caricatures. Mm-hmm. So as a philosopher himself, he's very good at being able to unpack that. The other book I'm reading is How to Think by Dr. Alan Jacobs. So he is a Anglican thinker down at Baylor, and this book is definitely required reading for people who engage online or really just engage in general, whether it's politics, religion, etc. But he's very big on trying to do away with the what we have. Maybe we don't say it, but how we live as the like repugnant cultural other, I think is how he frames that, the RCO. But how we can have conversations with people and not immediately view them as monstrous, as, troublesome, problematic, toxic, all these words that we throw out.
Yeah.
It's a very, very easy book. Like, I'm blowing through it. He's very witty. I've been going through his blog for in the past couple of days. I've been reading the past couple of years. I'm just going through and reading everything. But it's a very good book. Definitely recommend it.
That sounds like a really good one for
I'm trying to remember.
Have you read that?
I think I might have read that one. Yeah.
Nice.
It's got a pair of glasses on there. Yep. It sounds like, is this a book about glasses? I'm like, no, it is not.
Yeah.
Also, David, before I let you go, what are some next steps if somebody wanted to get more into some of the either just fun, enjoyable, or some of the thoughtful monster movies? What would you suggest?
So a good blend of both is I would start with the Gamera Trilogy, which was done in the 90s.
So good.
The 2001 Godzilla movie we discussed is by the same director. But despite the fact, on paper, it's a giant flying turtle who's trying to protect the Earth, does not sound that deep or interesting. But the 3 films are arguably, I think, some of the best giant monster films, and honestly, just great movies in general. I definitely recommend those. Apart from that,
100% co-sign that.
Yeah, apart from that, The Host by Bong Joon-ho.
No, the Gamera films are so good. Some of the best, I think, all around for the technology and the story and the spectacle, and super enjoyable. So highly recommend those. He mentioned All Monsters Attack, also known as Godzilla's Revenge. I think it's just so much fun. It gets a lot of flack. I always defend it online when it comes up. It's super great.
If you like the deeper themes dealing with war and stuff, there's a movie called Atragon that's also really good. Very minimal monster, so it's takes up maybe 3 minutes of the whole movie. But if you really want to get into like themes about patriotism, nationalism, pacifism, stuff like that, that one's really good too.
Dope.
Interesting.
Nice.
All right. We'll link all these in there. David, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah,
and,
my pleasure.
If people want to catch you or your next project or your podcast, where can they find where you're at and what you're doing?
So by the time this comes out, our new podcast is going to be public. It's called Saved by the Belial, an atrocious Ultraman podcast. So Chris and I, we're going to be going through the Ultraman series. But the catch is, instead of like devoting an entire podcast episode on a single show or a single episode, so in Ultraman, he only has 3 minutes to fight. It's called the color timer. So we only have 3 minutes to discuss an episode of a show, so we have to move on to the next one. So it's kind of try to keep the energy up, right?
I like that.
So,
premise.
so you can find us. It'll be it's technically Atrocious Pod, but and the when they try to say that on the show, they say atrocious. So it's a Atrocious Pod that'll be on Twitter. Atrociouspod.wordpress.com will be our website. As for my individual Twitter account, if I don't end up deleting it again, it would just be Toku Theologian, so Toku and then Theologian. But yeah, I mean, that's really all I'm doing right now, you know, because I spent a whole bunch of money to get a master's degree and I'm not doing anything with it. So that's about it.
Oh man, that's a mood right there.
So how many episodes are you guys going to be? How many Ultraman episodes are you guys going to be covering per show?
It depends
Like a
on the
ton?
show, right? So like with the original series, it'll probably be about 10 episodes per show, so about a half-hour show or so.
Whoa.
And then some of the shows only have like 12 episodes, so we're going to break it up into 6 and 6. So
Nice.
it depends, but it'll probably be about 4 episodes per show.
I'm
So-
excited to check that out.
Yeah,
This should be
the
fun.
goal is to, because all these Ultraman shows are now legal, and you can view
Thank
them
you,
really
Mill
easily
Creek.
here in the
Thank
United
you so
States.
much.
Oh, absolutely. So the goal is to invite people who have never watched these shows to be able to watch them with us. Where, I mean, if they wanted to go, because we're bi-weekly, right? So it's like you could watch one episode a night, and you're going to stay on track with us.
Awesome.
So
Well, thanks for the invite. I might take you up on that.
it's a lot
Trevor,
of
come on over. Let's
All
watch
right.
some Ultraman.
There you go.
fun.
Yeah. Hey, could be fun. Absolutely. And this was a lot of fun. So yeah, thanks so much for your time tonight, David.
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully, KSP listens to this one.
There you go. Yeah, we'll be like,
I'll
hey,
send it
you
to
heard
her.
about our friend
I
David?
mean, we talked about Frankenstein, right? Of course, she's got to care about it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you
No,
just tag
Chris-
that.
Chris, actually, my co-host, is the one who introduced me to her, and I've really been wanting to get into some of her books here. I keep telling myself, I'm like, I'm not buying any more books till I read at least another shelf or two. So it's all library, and my library doesn't
reading
have any
well.
of her stuff. So
On Reading Well is incredible.
yeah,
Well, thanks again for joining us
Appreciate
tonight,
it. Absolutely.
David. It was a lot of fun.
have a good night, guys.
All right, we'll see you again.
See ya.
Well, guys, that was David Marshall from the Kaiju Apostle podcast, and as he just announced, Saved by was it Belial?
I believe that's what
The
he said.
Ultraman. We'll have a link in
His
the
new
show notes.
Ultraman podcast.
It's a new Ultraman podcast. It's gonna be real dope. Really, really pretty cool concept there. Yeah, hope you enjoyed this exploration of this monster movie that maybe went a little bit deeper than most people thought.
If you guys appreciate what we're doing here at The Substance and want to support us and partner with us, the two main ways you can do that are become a monthly supporter on the anchor link in our show notes. Sign up at whatever monthly amount you are comfortable with, whether it's a couple bucks a month, $10 a month, whatever works for you. We appreciate everybody who partners with us. We are going to be working on getting some specific goals out to you here so that you guys can know more how to support if you're so interested. And there's also Cash App. If you don't want to, if monthly support is just not something you want to deal with, but you want to send us a little bit here and there when you really like a show that we do, you can find us on Cash App at $TheSubstancePod.
And for every episode that you see the letter S, donate $5.
That's like
No.
every episode.
Exactly.
That's good
kidding.
work. Good work.
Follow us on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter at The Substance Pod. There you can interact with us. Definitely give us a follow. There we will also have the episodes that have dropped. We will have our giveaways, our substance shout outs, and you can leave us a comment. Give us a reflection of what you thought about the episode, and we'd love to just engage and interact on our social media platforms.
And also, we haven't said this in a while, rate and review. It always helps us, and we will try to be featuring more of those on the show and thanking you personally when you do that.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be like the most eloquent thing in the whole world if you just like write a couple lines about what you like.
Let somebody know why you like it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And don't forget, we are on YouTube. So follow us, subscribe, and hit that notification bell on YouTube. That way, any new episode that drops will pop right up on your YouTube feed.
And write us an email. We're at thesubstancepod@gmail.com. We'll give you the substance guarantee. Trev's going to read 100% of the emails that get sent in this next month. And Philip might read some.
I might. I probably will.
Yeah. It'd be pretty dope. And you should also give us a call at our phone number. It is 913-703-3883. Give us some thoughts. Give us some feedback or testimonials or just a personal story. If it's good stuff, we will put it on the show. Well, as always, we appreciate you guys joining in with us, and we will see you next week.
Sorry, I went over you there. Say that again.
No, it's fine, dude.
Two different tracks.
It's totally legit, dude. You can just be on it, man. I even playing that music. If it's good stuff, we will put it on the show.
Or let us know what you think you would, or let us know what you think you, gosh dang it. Forget that.
Don't let us know what you think. The end. Thanks.
Don't let us
Bye.
Don't let us know what you think.
Don't let us know what you think.